She never liked arrogant men until she crossed paths with the most tempting billionaire in town. What started as a slap quickly turned into a whirlwind of teasing glances, bold comebacks, and magnetic tension. But when two opposite worlds collide, anything can happen. Stay tuned for a story you won't forget. The bachelorette party was in full swing at the Velvet Room, one of Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop bars, and Sophie Bennett was desperately trying to remember why she had agreed to wear a tiara that said Bride Tribe in glittery pink letters. "You're supposed to be having fun," Megan shouted over the music, her own bride-to-be sash slightly askew after 3 margaritas. "This is my last weekend of freedom. You're marrying the love of your life, not going to prison," Sophie laughed, adjusting the ridiculous tiara. "But fine, I'll have fun. What does fun look like exactly?" Megan's eyes sparkled with mischief. "It looks like that." Sophie followed her best friend's gaze across the crowded bar and felt her breath catch. A man stood near the bar, tall enough to see over most of the crowd, with dark hair slightly disheveled in a way that looked effortlessly intentional. His jaw could cut glass, and even from this distance, she could tell his shoulders were broad beneath his perfectly fitted charcoal blazer. He was laughing at something his companion said, and the smile transformed his already striking face into something almost unfairly attractive. "Absolutely not," Sophie said firmly. "I didn't say anything. Your face said everything. I'm not talking to a stranger at a bar. That's how true crime podcasts start." But fate, as it turned out, had other plans. 20 minutes later, Sophie was returning from the restroom when she collided with a wall of expensive cologne and solid muscle. Before she could apologize, before she could even register what was happening, 2 hands cupped her face and a mouth pressed against hers. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. The kiss lasted exactly 3 seconds. The slap that followed echoed through the entire bar. The tall, gorgeous stranger stumbled back, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, his grey eyes wide with shock. The entire section of the bar had gone silent, every head turned toward the spectacle. Sophie's palm was stinging, her heart pounding with a mixture of outrage and something else she refused to examine too closely. "What is wrong with you?" He stared at her for a long moment, and then, impossibly, he smiled. Not a smirk, not a defensive grin, but a genuine, slightly dazed smile that made him look almost boyish despite the designer clothes and the expensive watch glinting at his wrist. "That," he said slowly, his voice deep and slightly rough, "was the best slap of my life." Sophie blinked. "Would you like another one?" "I think I might." He was still smiling, still holding his cheek, and there was something in his eyes that looked dangerously like fascination. "I'm incredibly sorry. My friend bet me $1,000 that I couldn't get a kiss from the most beautiful woman in the bar. I don't know what possessed me. Apparently toxic masculinity and too much whiskey." He laughed, a real surprised laugh. "Fair enough. Can I buy you a drink to apologize, or 12 drinks? I'm Alexander Hartwell, and I promise I'm not usually this much of an idiot." "No, you cannot buy me a drink. And I don't care if you're Alexander the Great. You don't kiss strangers without permission." Sophie crossed her arms. "Has that actually worked for you before?" "Never tried it before. And based on the results, I won't try it again." He tilted his head, studying her with unnerving intensity. "Though I have to say you have excellent form. Left-handed, right?" "Right-handed, I just commit to my choices." "Noted." He glanced at her tiara. "Bride tribe." "My best friend's bachelorette party." "Ah, so you're not the bride." "Brilliant deduction. You should consider detective work." He laughed again, and Sophie hated how much she liked the sound. This man had just kissed her without permission, she reminded herself. He was clearly arrogant, clearly wealthy, clearly used to getting whatever he wanted. The kind of man she had spent her entire adult life avoiding. So why did she feel slightly disappointed when Megan appeared at her elbow, pulling her away with urgent whispers about not making a scene at my party? Back at their table, surrounded by the safety of friends and cocktails, Sophie tried to shake off the encounter. But she could feel his gaze on her across the bar, and when she finally gave in and looked, he raised his glass in her direction with that same infuriating smile. She pointedly turned her back. "So," Megan said, her eyes sparkling with barely contained glee, "do you want to tell me why you slapped Alexander Hartwell?" Sophie paused with her drink halfway to her lips. Should I know that name? Megan's mouth dropped open. Sophie. He's been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. He's one of the most successful investors in the country. He's an overgrown man-child with boundary issues, worth approximately $4 billion. Sophie choked on her margarita. I'm sorry, billion with a B? With a very large B. Megan was grinning now. And you slapped him in front of 100 people. Sophie glanced back toward the bar, but Alexander Hartwell had vanished from his previous spot. She ignored the absurd flicker of disappointment in her chest. Well, she said, taking a long sip of her drink, at least I'll have a good story for the office on Monday. She had no idea that across the city, in the back of a black town car, Alexander Hartwell was pressing his fingers to his still tingling cheek and smiling like a man who had just discovered something precious and rare, and who had absolutely no intention of letting it slip away. 2 days later, Sophie was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by books, the smell of paper and coffee, and the blessed silence of a Monday morning at Brennan's Books. The bookstore was a relic of old Manhattan, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bakery on the Upper West Side. Sophie had worked there for 5 years, ever since her grandmother's illness had forced her to abandon her graduate studies and find stable employment. Most people might have resented the detour, but Sophie had fallen in love with the creaky wooden floors, the towering shelves, and the customers who still believed in the magic of a physical book. She was restocking the poetry section when the bell above the door chimed. We're not officially open for another 10... Sophie turned and nearly dropped her armful of Dickinson and Frost. Alexander Hartwell stood in the doorway, looking somehow even more devastatingly handsome in the soft morning light. Gone was the blazer. Today he wore a simple grey sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent, dark jeans, and a smile that suggested he knew exactly how much trouble he was causing. You, Sophie managed. Me, he agreed pleasantly. I brought coffee. He held up 2 paper cups from the overpriced cafe down the street, and Sophie noticed for the first time that he looked slightly nervous. It was such an unexpected expression on his confident face that she almost forgot to be annoyed. Almost. How did you find me? Your friend Megan posted photos from the bachelorette party. You were tagged. Your Instagram bio says, book lover, bookstore employee, future bookstore owner. He shrugged. There are only so many bookstores on the Upper West Side. This is my 3rd attempt this morning. That's not incredibly stalkerish. I prefer determined. He set the coffee cups on the nearest table and slid his hands into his pockets. Look, I know I made a terrible first impression. Possibly the worst first impression in the history of human interaction, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, and I figured the least I could do was apologize properly. Sophie hugged the poetry books to her chest like a shield. You apologized at the bar. That was a whiskey-fueled apology. This is a sober, caffeinated, genuinely contrite apology. He took a step closer, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something warm and woodsy that made her think of fireplaces and autumn evenings. I'm sorry. Truly, what I did was completely out of line, and you had every right to slap me into next week. I only slapped you into next Tuesday. His smile widened. There it is. That wit that's been haunting me for 48 hours. Sophie felt heat creep up her neck and sternly ordered herself to stay focused. Mr. Hartwell. Alex. Mr. Hartwell. I appreciate the apology and the stalking skills, but I think we should just agree to never see each other again. That would be logical, he agreed. Sensible, even. Good. Except I don't want to be sensible. He sat down at the table, uninvited, and gestured to the chair across from him. Have coffee with me, 10 minutes. If after 10 minutes you still want me to leave, I'll walk out that door and you'll never see me again. And if I don't have coffee with you, then I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. He picked up one of the coffee cups and took a sip, perfectly at ease. I'm a very patient man, Sophie. You know my name. Instagram. Right. The stalking. Determined research, he corrected. Sophie stood there, clutching Emily Dickinson to her chest, and felt the strangest sensation, like standing at the edge of something significant. This man was everything she didn't want, wealthy, arrogant, probably used to women falling at his feet. And yet, there was something in the way he was looking at her, something almost vulnerable beneath the confident exterior, that made her hesitate. 10 minutes, she heard herself say. And I'm setting a timer. His grin was blinding. Fair enough. She sat down across from him, accepted the coffee he slid toward her, and made a show of pulling out her phone to set the timer. So, Alex said, leaning back in his chair, tell me about yourself, Sophie Bennett. You already know about me. You researched. I know surface details. I want the real story. His grey eyes were intent on her face, and Sophie felt oddly seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and thrilling. Why books? Why this bookstore? What's the dream of owning your own place about? Sophie hesitated. She rarely talked about herself, really talked, but something about his genuine interest loosened her tongue. She found herself telling him about her grandmother, who had read to her every night as a child, about the years she'd spent as a caretaker while her grandmother faded into Alzheimer's, about the day after the funeral when she'd walked into this bookstore and felt for the first time in months like she could breathe again. I want to open a bookstore cafe, she admitted, a place where people can lose themselves in stories and stay for hours, where the coffee is good and the books are better. That sounds wonderful, Alex said, and he sounded like he meant it. Your turn. Sophie glanced at her phone. You've got 4 minutes left. He laughed. What do you want to know? Why did you really come here today? And don't say it's because you couldn't stop thinking about me. That's what men say in movies right before they turn out to be serial killers. It's the truth, though. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. I've been photographed with a lot of women, dated some of them, but I've never been slapped by one. I've never had someone look at me the way you did. Like my money and my face meant absolutely nothing. They don't mean nothing. They mean something to everyone else. His eyes found hers. I just want the chance to know you, Sophie. Not as a conquest or a project, just as someone who makes me laugh and calls me on my nonsense. The timer went off, sharp and loud in the quiet bookstore. Sophie stared at him. He stared back. Well? He asked. Am I leaving? She picked up her coffee and took a long sip, making him wait. His expression was so hopeful, so unexpectedly vulnerable, that she felt her defenses cracking despite her best efforts. Give me your phone, she said finally. He handed it over without question, and she typed in her number before she could talk herself out of it. Don't make me regret this, she said, handing it back. I won't. His smile was like sunrise. Thank you, Sophie. You're still annoying. I know. He stood, still smiling. But I'm very cute. Debatable. Dinner Friday? Maybe. Ask me properly, via text, without stalking. He was still laughing as he walked out the door, and Sophie was still pretending her heart wasn't racing as she watched him go. The first text arrived at 7:47 p.m. that same evening. Alex, so about that dinner on Friday. I was thinking Italian, unless you hate Italian, in which case I'll pretend I meant something else entirely. Sophie stared at her phone, sitting cross-legged on her tiny apartment couch with a bowl of cereal that was passing for dinner. She had told herself she wouldn't respond immediately. She would be cool, aloof, mysterious. She lasted 45 seconds. Sophie, I don't hate Italian, but I'm suspicious of men who default to Italian. It's very, I read a dating advice column once. Alex, ouch. What would be less suspicious? Sophie, surprise me, but not in a kiss a stranger without permission way. Alex, that was one time. Sophie, that you've admitted to. Alex, I'm starting to think you're never going to let me live that down. Sophie, you would be correct. She was smiling at her phone like an idiot, and she hated herself for it. This was exactly what men like Alexander Hartwell did. They charmed their way in with wit and persistence, and before you knew it, you were crying into ice cream while they moved on to someone more suitable for their world. Her phone buzzed again. Alex, for what it's worth, I've never kissed a stranger before, or after. You're singular in my history of terrible decisions. Sophie, I'm honored. Alex, you should be. I'm very selective about my terrible decisions. They texted until midnight. About books. He preferred biographies, she preferred fiction, and they debated the merits of each for an hour. About food, he confessed to an embarrassing love of cheap pizza, despite having access to every five-star restaurant in the city. About dreams, he admitted that his empire sometimes felt more like a prison than an achievement. When Sophie finally forced herself to put her phone down and sleep, she dreamed of grey eyes and sardonic smiles, and woke up irritated with herself. Friday arrived faster than expected. Alex had refused to tell her where they were going, only texting cryptic instructions about wearing comfortable shoes and something warm. She changed outfits 4 times, finally settling on dark jeans, a cream sweater, and her favorite boots. Nothing special. Definitely not chosen to impress anyone. Alex arrived at exactly 7 p.m., and when Sophie opened her door, she found him holding a single sunflower, bright and cheerful and completely unexpected. "Roses felt too predictable," he said, and there was that nervousness again, barely hidden beneath his confident exterior. "You don't strike me as a roses kind of woman." "I'm not." Sophie took the flower, oddly touched. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise. I don't like surprises." "Too bad." He offered his arm like a character from a period drama. "Shall we?" The surprise turned out to be a tiny restaurant in Brooklyn that Sophie had never heard of. No sign, no menu, just a door that Alex knocked on twice before an elderly Italian woman opened it and broke into a delighted smile. "Alessandro, you bring a girl. Finally." "Maria, this is Sophie." "Sophie, Maria taught me everything I know about pasta when I was 22 and broke." Sophie looked between them, confused. "I thought you were always wealthy." "Born wealthy. Disowned at 21 when I told my father I wanted to build my own company instead of joining his." Alex shrugged like it was nothing, but Sophie caught the flicker of old pain in his eyes. "Spent 3 years eating ramen and working 18-hour days. Maria's restaurant was the only real food I could afford, and only because she took pity on me." Maria swatted his arm affectionately. "You were too skinny, like a sad puppy. I couldn't let you starve." They were seated at a corner table, and the food began arriving without any order being placed. Bread still warm from the oven, pasta that melted on Sophie's tongue, wine that tasted like sunshine and summer. Alex asked about her bookstore dreams, and Sophie found herself sharing more than she intended. The business plan she'd been refining for years, the locations she'd scouted, the fear that she would never have enough money to make it real. "I could—" Alex started. "No." Sophie cut him off gently but firmly. "I know you mean well, but I want to earn it. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." His smile was soft, admiring. "You're remarkable, you know that." "I know many things." She took a sip of wine to hide her blush. "Tell me about this company you built while eating ramen." He talked about the early days, the failures, the sleepless nights, the moment when everything finally clicked. Sophie watched his face animate with passion and realized that beneath the polish and the billions, there was a man who had worked desperately hard for everything he had. When they finally left Maria's, stuffed and slightly tipsy, the city had grown dark and quiet around them. They walked along the waterfront, close but not quite touching, and Sophie felt something shift in her chest, a door opening that she'd kept firmly closed for years. "I had a really good time," she admitted. "You sound surprised." "I am. I expected you to be insufferable for at least 3 more dates. I contain multitudes." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Sophie, I know my world is complicated, and I know you have every reason to think I'm just another rich guy looking for a distraction, but I need you to know, this isn't a game to me. You're not a game to me." Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Alex, you don't have to say anything." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather-light and devastating. "I just needed you to know." Then he stepped back, breaking the spell, and offered his arm again with a crooked smile. "Come on, let me take you home before I do something else stupid like try to kiss you." Sophie laughed, but as they walked to the waiting car, she couldn't help thinking that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have minded if he had. The first month with Alex felt like falling into a dream Sophie hadn't known she was having. He appeared at Brennan's Books 3 mornings a week with coffee and pastries, always remembering her exact order: oat milk latte, extra shot, the almond croissant from the bakery next door. He would perch on the edge of her desk while she worked, making sarcastic comments about the romance novels she shelved, and pretending to be offended when she compared him to the brooding billionaires on their covers. "I am nothing like Damian Blackwood," he protested one Tuesday, holding up a book with a shirtless man on the cover. "You're literally a brooding billionaire who kissed a stranger and then couldn't leave her alone." "First of all, I don't brood. Second, this man has a tattoo of a dragon. I have standards." "Do you have any tattoos?" "That's classified information." Sophie threw a paperclip at him. He caught it and tucked it into his pocket like a treasure. The dates multiplied like rabbits. A jazz club in Harlem, where he held her hand under the table. A Broadway show where she cried at the finale and he pretended not to notice her stealing his handkerchief. An art exhibition where they spent 2 hours arguing about whether modern art was genius or a collective delusion. And through it all the tension built. Alex had developed a habit of touching her waist when he guided her through crowds, just the lightest pressure of his palm against the small of her back, but it sent electricity sparking through her entire body. He kissed her forehead when he said goodbye, his lips lingering just a moment too long. Once, during a late dinner, he reached across the table and ran his fingers through her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear while his eyes dropped to her mouth with unmistakable want. Sophie was going slowly insane. "Just kiss him already," Megan said during one of their weekly phone calls. "The sexual tension is giving me second-hand frustration. I'm not going to throw myself at him." "Why not? I threw myself at David on our second date, and look at us now." Sophie decided not to mention that Megan had also recently confided that David was working so much she barely saw him anymore. That conversation had left a stone of worry in Sophie's stomach that she couldn't quite shake. It was on a Thursday evening, leaving a small Italian restaurant in Soho, that everything changed. Sophie saw the flash first, a burst of light that left spots dancing in her vision. Then another, and suddenly they were surrounded by men with cameras, all shouting questions at once. "Alex, who's the girl? Are you two dating? What's her name? How long have you been together?" Alex's arm wrapped around her instantly, pulling her close, shielding her from the worst of it. His jaw was tight, his voice cold and commanding as he pushed through the crowd toward his waiting car. "No comment, move. I said move." The car door closed behind them, and the chaos was muffled to a dull roar. Sophie's heart was pounding, her hands shaking. She had never experienced anything like that. The aggression, the invasion, the complete disregard for personal space. "I'm sorry." Alex's voice was rough. "I should have warned you. I should have—" "It's okay." It wasn't okay, but Sophie could see the guilt etched into his features and couldn't bear to make it worse. "I knew you were famous. I just didn't realize that it would be like that." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "I hate this part. I've never hated it more than right now." She reached for his hand and squeezed. "It's okay," she said again, and this time she almost believed it. The photos hit the gossip sites by morning. "Billionaire bachelor Alexander Hartwell spotted with mystery woman," screamed one headline. "Who is she?" "Inside Alex Hartwell's new romance," declared another. By noon, someone had identified her. By evening, they knew where she worked. Sophie watched her phone explode with notifications, friend requests from strangers, comments on photos she'd posted years ago, messages ranging from curious to cruel. "Cazadora de fortuna," one anonymous account wrote. "Gold digger." "She's not even that pretty," said another. "He could do so much better." "How long until he gets bored?" Sophie told herself not to read them. She read them anyway, each comment a small knife sliding between her ribs. Alex called that night, his voice tight with anger. "I'm going to find out who these people are. I'm going to—" "It's fine, Alex, it's just internet comments." "It's not fine. They're attacking you because of me." "It'll blow over." She injected false brightness into her voice. "I'm nobody. They'll lose interest." But they didn't lose interest. The photographers appeared outside Brennan's Books the next day, and the day after that. Customers started recognizing her, asking intrusive questions instead of asking for book recommendations. One woman actually asked if she could take a selfie with Alex Hartwell's girlfriend. Sophie smiled through it all, but at night, alone in her apartment, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had gotten herself into. Alex tried to fix it. He issued a statement through his publicist asking for privacy. It only made things worse. Suddenly their relationship was confirmed, official, and the media attention intensified. "It'll die down," he promised during a quiet dinner at his penthouse, away from prying eyes. "It always does eventually. You just have to wait it out." "How long is eventually?" He hesitated a moment too long. "I don't know. But I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." She wanted to believe him. She did believe him, mostly. But as she lay in his arms on his obscenely comfortable couch, watching the city lights glitter below, She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous, and she had no idea if she was brave enough to keep falling. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday, embossed in gold on paper so thick it probably cost more than Sophie's electricity bill. The Hartwell Foundation Annual Charity Gala, she read aloud. Black tie. This Saturday. Alex watched her from across her tiny kitchen table, his long legs cramped in the small space, looking ridiculously out of place among her mismatched mugs and second-hand furniture. You don't have to come. I know these events aren't exactly thrilling. Do you want me to come? More than I've wanted anything in a very long time. His grey eyes were soft, sincere. But only if you're comfortable. My world can be a lot. Sophie thought about the photographers, the comments, the constant scrutiny. Then she thought about Alex's face when he talked about his foundation, the one genuine passion that seemed to exist outside his business empire, funding literacy programs for underprivileged children. I'll come, she said, but you're going to have to help me figure out what to wear. I don't exactly have a black tie wardrobe. His smile could have powered the entire city block. I might have some ideas about that. The ideas turned out to be a personal shopper at Bergdorf Goodman, who whisked Sophie into a private fitting room and presented her with a parade of gowns. After an hour of trying on dresses that cost more than her annual salary, she finally found one that made her catch her breath. It was emerald green silk, simple and elegant, with a neckline that was sophisticated without being revealing, and a cut that made her feel like she actually belonged in Alex's world. The color brought out the warmth in her brown hair and made her hazel eyes look almost golden. That one, Alex said when she emerged, his voice slightly hoarse. Definitely that one. Sophie looked at the price tag and nearly fainted. Alex, I can't let you... Consider it a gift for putting up with me. That's emotional manipulation. Is it working? She wanted to argue. She really did. But the way he was looking at her, like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, made her protests die in her throat. Saturday arrived too quickly. Sophie spent 3 hours getting ready, her hands trembling as she applied mascara and twisted her hair into an elegant updo. By the time Alex arrived to pick her up, she was a bundle of nerves wrapped in emerald silk. You're stunning, he breathed, and the reverence in his voice almost made her believe it. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and stepping into the grand hall was like entering another dimension. Crystal chandeliers cast everything in golden light. Women dripped with diamonds. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos discussed investments and acquisitions over champagne that probably cost more per bottle than Sophie made in a week. She gripped Alex's arm like a lifeline. Breathe, he murmured against her ear. You belong here as much as anyone else. I really don't. You belong with me. That's all that matters. For the first hour, things went well. Alex kept her close, introducing her to business associates and foundation board members with obvious pride. Sophie smiled and made small talk, and tried not to feel like a fraud playing dress-up in a world she didn't understand. Then Alex was pulled away by an urgent conversation about the foundation's budget, and Sophie found herself standing alone near the champagne table. So you're the famous bookstore girl. Sophie turned to find a woman watching her with the kind of smile that looked friendly, but felt like an assessment. She was blonde, beautiful, and wearing a silver gown that probably cost more than Sophie's apartment. I'm Victoria Sterling. The woman extended a perfectly manicured hand. Alex and I are old friends. Something about the pause before friends made Sophie's stomach tighten. Nice to meet you. He talks about you, you know. At least according to mutual acquaintances. Victoria took a sip of champagne, her eyes never leaving Sophie's face. It's quite the Cinderella story. Bookstore employee catches the eye of the billionaire. Very romantic. I'm not sure I'd describe it that way. No? How would you describe it? Before Sophie could answer, 2 more women materialized, friends of Victoria's apparently, both equally polished and intimidating. They formed a small circle around Sophie, and she suddenly felt very much like prey surrounded by predators. Love the dress, one of them said. So bold of you to wear that color. Most women couldn't pull it off. It must be so interesting for you, experiencing all this, added the other. The parties, the culture. It's quite an education, I imagine. I've been to museums before, Sophie said evenly. Of course you have. Victoria's smile sharpened. I just mean, this is a lot to take in for someone from your background. Alex's world can be overwhelming. Sophie felt the barbs beneath every word, felt herself shrinking under their polished contempt. These women knew exactly what they were doing, insulting her while maintaining perfect deniability. She wanted to fire back. She wanted to tell them exactly what she thought of their designer cruelty and their champagne snobbery. But her voice seemed to have frozen in her throat, and all she could do was stand there, smile fixed, dignity barely intact. "There you are." Alex appeared at her elbow, his hand finding its familiar place at the small of her back. "Sorry that took so long. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine." Sophie forced brightness into her voice. "Just making friends." Victoria's expression transformed into something warm and welcoming, and Sophie marveled at the speed of the change. "Alex, darling, we were just telling Sophie how lucky she is." "I'm the lucky one," Alex said, and he pressed a kiss to Sophie's temple that made her heart ache. But as they walked away, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted. She had glimpsed the reality beneath Alex's glamorous world, and it was sharper and crueler than she had imagined. She didn't tell him what happened. She smiled through the rest of the gala, danced with him under the chandeliers and pretended everything was fine. It was easier than admitting she was terrified. The second month brought a new level of invasion. Someone had done their research. Thorough, merciless research. An article appeared on a popular gossip site. Everything we know about Alex Hartwell's bookstore girlfriend. It included where Sophie worked, where she lived, an estimate of her salary and photographs of her apartment building that made her skin crawl. The comparisons came next. Side-by-side images of Sophie and Alex's previous girlfriends, heiresses, models, a tech CEO's daughter, with cruel commentary about the differences. From socialites to shopgirls, has Alex Hartwell lowered his standards? Sophie deleted her social media accounts. It didn't help. The comments found her anyway, forwarded by well-meaning friends who thought she should know what people were saying. "You should sue them," Megan said during an emergency coffee session. "This is harassment." "It's celebrity gossip. It's legal." Sophie stared into her latte, exhausted. "I just have to wait it out." But waiting became increasingly impossible when reporters started appearing outside Brennan's books. The first time, Sophie was caught off guard. She stepped outside for her lunch break, and suddenly there were 3 people with cameras in her face shouting questions. "Sophie, how does it feel to date a billionaire? Are you pregnant? Is that why he's with you? What do you say to critics who call you a gold digger?" She tried to push past them, tried to stay calm, but they followed her down the street, cameras flashing, questions getting more invasive by the second. Finally, something in her snapped. "Please stop," she said, turning to face them. "Please, I'm just trying to live my life. I'm not a story. I'm a person. Please just leave me alone." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated herself for showing weakness, hated the tears that were threatening to spill over. Someone uploaded the video that night. Within hours it had been viewed 2 million times. The internet, predictably, was divided. Some called her brave and sympathized with her plight. Others mocked her for wanting privacy while dating someone famous. The cruelest comments suggested she was faking tears for attention. Alex called her at midnight, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I just saw the video. Sophie, why didn't you tell me it had gotten this bad? Because you're busy. Because you have a company to run. Because I didn't want to make this into a bigger deal than it already is. You being harassed is a very big deal." She could hear him pacing, could picture the tension in his shoulders. "I'm going to fix this. I'll release a statement tomorrow asking for privacy." "Alex, I don't think that's a good idea." "It's the least I can do." The statement was released the next morning, professionally worded, firm but polite, requesting that the media respect their privacy during this time. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Suddenly, their relationship was confirmed, official, undeniable. The coverage intensified. More photographers appeared. Sophie started taking different routes to work, leaving through the back entrance, wearing sunglasses and hats like she was in a spy movie. It would have been almost funny if it weren't so exhausting. Through it all, Alex tried his best. He sent flowers to the bookstore. He showed up when he could, glaring at photographers with enough intensity to make them back off temporarily. He held her hand in the car and promised over and over that it would get better. But he was also closing the biggest deal of his career, some kind of merger that Sophie didn't fully understand, but that seemed to consume his every waking moment. He would text her at 2 a.m. apologizing for missing dinner. He would cancel plans with genuine regret in his voice, promising to make it up to her. She understood. She really did. But understanding didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. It was Megan who finally put Sophie's deepest fears into words. They were sitting in Megan's beautiful brownstone living room, surrounded by the evidence of a perfect life. Wedding photos, expensive furniture, a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. But Megan's eyes were red-rimmed and her hands shook as she poured the wine. "David and I are in trouble," she admitted. "He's so focused on making partner that I feel like I've become furniture. Something that exists in his house but doesn't actually matter." Sophie's heart clenched. "Meg, we don't talk anymore. We don't laugh. We're roommates who occasionally share a bed." Megan wiped her eyes. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I see how much Alex works. I see how this world operates. And I don't want the same thing to happen to you. Alex is different. David was different too, in the beginning." Megan's smile was sad, tired. "They're all different in the beginning." That night, Sophie lay awake in her apartment staring at the ceiling. She thought about Alex's cancelled dinners, his midnight texts, his sincere apologies. She thought about the photographs outside her door and the comments she couldn't stop reading. She thought about Victoria Sterling's sharp smile and the knowledge that there was a whole world of women like her, women who belonged in Alex's universe in ways Sophie never would. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alex. "Alex, missing you. Meeting ran late again. Dinner tomorrow? I promise I'll make it this time." She typed back a quick response, something light and forgiving, something that didn't reveal the fear growing in her chest like a vine wrapping around her heart. But as she put her phone away and closed her eyes, Megan's words echoed in her mind. They're all different in the beginning. She was starting to wonder if that was true. The third month arrived like a slow-moving storm, and Sophie watched herself disappear piece by piece. The harassment had become background noise, constant, inescapable, exhausting. Photographers appeared every morning outside her apartment building. Customers at Brennan's Books whispered and pointed, some bold enough to ask for photos, others just staring with unconcealed curiosity. One woman actually asked Sophie to sign a copy of a gossip magazine that featured her face on the cover. "I'm not famous," Sophie had said weakly. "You're dating Alexander Hartwell. That makes you famous enough." Sophie had started losing weight, not intentionally, but because her appetite had vanished somewhere between the second tabloid article and the 15th invasive comment about her appearance. She wasn't sleeping well either, kept awake by the anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. Alex noticed. Of course he noticed. He was attentive that way, always cataloguing the details of her face, her moods, her well-being. "You're not eating enough," he said one evening at his penthouse, watching her push pasta around her plate. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "Sophie." "I'm fine, Alex." She forced a smile. "Just a lot going on at work. The holiday season is coming up." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. He had to leave soon anyway. Another meeting, another conference call, another piece of the massive deal that had been consuming his life for weeks. "I'll make it up to you," he promised, kissing her forehead at the door. "When this deal closes, we'll go somewhere, just the two of us. Somewhere without cameras or gossip sites or any of this mess." "That sounds nice." "It'll happen, I promise." She watched him go and wondered when promises had started feeling like postponements. Alex tried to compensate for his absence in the ways he knew how. Extravagant gifts appeared at the bookstore, first editions of her favorite novels, a vintage typewriter she'd once mentioned admiring, gourmet chocolates and flowers, and little notes that made her heart ache with their sincerity. When he did have time, he made it special. A private dinner at a restaurant that closed its doors just for them, a midnight picnic on his penthouse rooftop, surrounded by candles and soft music. A Sunday afternoon at a tiny independent cinema, where they watched old movies and he held her hand in the darkness. But the time between those moments stretched longer and longer, and Sophie found herself living in the gaps of his life, the small spaces between meetings and calls and the endless demands of his empire. She felt herself becoming smaller, quieter, more contained. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Sophie had spent the day dealing with a particularly aggressive photographer who had followed her from her apartment to the subway to the bookstore, snapping pictures the entire way. A customer had recognized her and loudly announced to the entire store, that Alex Hartwell's girlfriend was working the register. 3 teenage girls had giggled and filmed her on their phones while pretending to browse the YA section. By the time her shift ended, Sophie was shaking. She needed Alex. Needed his arms around her, needed to hear his voice telling her that everything would be okay. Needed for just one night to feel like she wasn't drowning. She called him at 7 o'clock. "Hey, beautiful." His voice was warm but distracted. She could hear other voices in the background, the shuffle of papers, the ambient noise of a busy office. "Everything okay? I need to see you tonight. I need to talk to you about something." A pause. A long, heavy pause that made her heart sink before he even spoke. "Tonight is the investor dinner, the one I told you about. It's the final step before we close. I can't miss it." Another pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, apologetic. "Can it wait until tomorrow? I'll clear my whole evening. We can do whatever you want." Sophie closed her eyes. She understood. She really did. This deal was important. Months of work culminating in a single crucial meeting. She wasn't being fair, asking him to drop everything for her emotional crisis. But understanding didn't stop the crack from spreading through her heart. "Sure," she heard herself say. "Tomorrow is fine." "You're sure?" "Because you sound—" "I'm sure. Go close your deal. We'll talk tomorrow. I love you, Sophie." The words hit her like a physical blow. He had never said them before. Not directly. Not like this. And he had chosen this moment, when he was about to hang up and leave her alone for another night, to finally say them. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," she said, and ended the call before he could hear her cry. That night, while Alex dined with investors in some exclusive restaurant, Sophie sat alone in her apartment and made a decision. She couldn't do this anymore. The cameras, the comments, the constant feeling of inadequacy, the cancelled dinners, and the empty promises. The way she had started to shrink herself, to fit into the margins of his life. She loved him. God, she loved him so much it terrified her. But love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning. Love wasn't supposed to make her feel invisible. By the time she finished crying, her mind was made up. She texted Alex, "Can you come to my place tomorrow after work? We need to talk." His response came 2 hours later. "Of course. I'll be there at 7. I love you, Sophie." She stared at those 3 words until her vision blurred. Then she put down her phone and started figuring out how to say goodbye to the only man who had ever made her feel completely, terrifyingly alive. Alex arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. Her favorite, always her favorite, and wearing the hopeful smile that had become increasingly rare over the past few weeks. Sophie stood in her tiny living room and felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Hey, beautiful." He stepped inside and immediately noticed something was wrong. The smile faded. "Sophie, what's going on?" She had practiced this speech, rehearsed it in the mirror, written it out on paper, whispered it to herself until the words stopped feeling like razors in her throat. But now, looking at him, this man who had become her entire world in just 3 short months, the carefully prepared words dissolved into nothing. "I think we should end this," she said instead, raw and unscripted. Alex went very still. The sunflowers hung forgotten in his hand. "What? I can't do this anymore." Her voice was trembling, tears already burning behind her eyes. "The cameras, the comments, the constant feeling that I'm not enough. I don't belong in your world, Alex, and you can't leave it for me. Sophie, please." He set the flowers on her coffee table, stepping toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish, please." She took a shaky breath. "I've tried so hard to be okay with all of this. The photographers, the gossip, the women at your events who look at me like I'm something they scraped off their designer shoes. I told myself it would get better, that you were worth it. I am worth it, we are worth it." His voice cracked on the words. "Whatever you're feeling, whatever's happened, we can fix it together." "How?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Are you going to stop being who you are? Are you going to make the media leave me alone? Are you going to make those women accept me?" She laughed, but it was hollow and broken. "I overheard them at the last event. Victoria and her friends, talking about how you'll get bored of me eventually, how I'm just a phase, how I'm already spending your money." Alex's expression darkened with fury. "They said that. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because what would you have done? Made a scene, defended my honor." Sophie shook her head. "It doesn't matter what you say or do. I will never be one of them. I will always be the bookstore girl who got lucky, and everyone knows it, including me. You're not just some... I'm tired, Alex. Her voice broke completely now, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so tired of feeling small next to you, of wondering if today is the day you realize you could do better, of living in the spaces between your meetings and your deals and your world that I will never understand. He was in front of her now, close enough to touch, and she could see the devastation written across his features. This powerful man, this billionaire who commanded boardrooms and negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, looked utterly lost. I said I love you, he said quietly. Last night on the phone. I meant it. I have never said that to anyone, only you. The words were a knife through her already bleeding heart. I know. Then why? Because love isn't enough. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces together. I thought it was. I wanted it to be. But I've spent the last 3 months disappearing, Alex, piece by piece. And I don't know how much of me will be left if I keep going. He reached for her face, and she didn't pull away. His thumbs brushed the tears from her cheeks with heartbreaking gentleness. I can change, he said. I can cut back on work. I can stop going to those events. I can... You can't change who you are, and I wouldn't want you to. She covered his hands with her own, holding them against her face for one last moment. You're brilliant and driven, and you're going to keep changing the world. That's who you are. I can't be the person standing in the shadows while you do it. Alex looked at her with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears, and Sophie realized she had never seen him cry, had never imagined he could. Please don't do this, he whispered. Please go, she whispered back. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They stood there, suspended in the wreckage of something beautiful, both knowing that when he walked out that door, everything would change. Finally, Alex stepped back. His hands fell away from her face, and the loss of his touch felt like losing gravity. This isn't over, he said, and his voice had shifted, still broken, still raw, but threaded through with something that sounded almost like determination. You think you're not enough? You're everything. And I'm going to prove it to you, Sophie Bennett, however long it takes. Alex. But he was already walking to the door, his shoulders rigid, his movements mechanical. He paused with his hand on the knob. I love you, he said without turning around. That's not going to stop just because you're scared. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than a gunshot. Sophie stood frozen in the middle of her apartment, surrounded by the sunflowers he'd left behind and the lingering scent of his cologne, and the terrible aching silence of a life that suddenly felt much too empty. She made it to her couch before her legs gave out. She cried until there was nothing left, until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen, and the sky outside her window had gone completely dark. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that had never felt quite so cold, Alexander Hartwell sat alone in the dark and made plans. Because he had spent his entire adult life building an empire, but for the first time, he understood that none of it meant anything without her. The first day without Alex felt like walking through water. Sophie went to work. She shelved books. She helped customers find mysteries and romances and biographies about people whose lives were far more interesting than hers. She smiled when she was supposed to smile, and said the right things at the right times, and no one seemed to notice that she was hollow inside. The texts started that evening. Alex, please talk to me. Alex, I understand if you need space, but I need you to know I'm not giving up. Alex, I love you, Sophie. That hasn't changed. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Every time she looked at his name on her screen, the wound ripped open fresh, and she wasn't sure she could survive bleeding any more than she already was. The second day was worse. Megan called, having somehow sensed through best friend telepathy that something was wrong. Sophie told her everything, the breakup, the reasons, the hollow ache that had taken up residence in her chest. Oh, honey, Megan said softly. Are you sure this is what you want? It's what I need. There's a difference. Is there? Sophie didn't have an answer for that. At work, she caught herself looking up every time the door chimed, some traitorous part of her hoping to see Alex's tall frame and sardonic smile. But the day passed without him, and she told herself it was relief she felt, not disappointment. The lie didn't even convince herself. That night, another text. Alex, I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. My assistant thinks I'm dying. She might be right. Alex, I know I failed you. I know I wasn't there when you needed me. But please, Sophie, give me a chance to fix this. Sophie stared at the messages until her vision blurred. Then she turned off her phone and cried herself to sleep for the second night in a row. The third day she almost broke. She was reorganizing the poetry section. She always gravitated toward poetry when she was sad, drawn to the way poets could distill heartbreak into a handful of perfect words. When her phone buzzed with Megan's name. Have you seen the news? Megan's voice was strange, breathless. I've been avoiding all news, and social media, and basically anything connected to the outside world. Sophie, turn on the television, any channel, it's everywhere. With shaking hands, Sophie pulled up a news site on her phone. The headline made her heart stop. Hartwell Industries announces major restructuring. CEO steps back from daily operations. She scrolled down, reading with increasing disbelief. Alex had announced a complete reorganization of his company. He was promoting his COO to handle day-to-day operations. He was stepping back from the endless meetings, the constant travel, the all-consuming work that had defined his life for nearly 2 decades. The statement he'd released was brief and uncharacteristically personal. I've spent 20 years building a company. I've decided it's time to build a life instead. Sophie's phone buzzed with a new text. Alex, this is just the beginning. Before she could process what that meant, the door to Brennan's books chimed. Alex stood in the entrance, looking nothing like the polished billionaire she had come to know. His hair was disheveled, dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and 3 days of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore jeans and a wrinkled sweater, and he looked like a man who had been through a war. He also looked like the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Alex, she breathed, what are you? I have something to say. His voice was rough, hoarse, and she realized with a shock that he had been crying. Alexander Hartwell, billionaire titan, had been crying. Please, just let me say it. The bookstore was busy, a weekday afternoon crowd browsing the shelves, a line at the register, the comfortable hum of literary commerce. People were starting to notice them, whispers spreading like ripples through water. Alex, we can't do this here. Yes, we can. He stepped further into the store and his eyes never left her face. Because I've spent my whole life doing things in private, hiding behind press releases and legal teams and carefully managed image. And look where it got us. People are staring. Let them. He stopped walking when he was just a few feet away. I don't care about them. I care about you. Only you. A customer near the mystery section pulled out her phone and started filming. Sophie wanted to disappear into the floor. And then Alex did something that stopped her heart entirely. He dropped to his knees. Right there in the middle of Brennan's books, surrounded by shelves of stories about love and loss and redemption, Alexander Hartwell knelt at her feet like a supplicant before a queen. The store went completely silent. I spent 3 days without you, he said, his voice carrying through the hush. And I realized something. I've been building the wrong empire. I have money and power and success, and none of it means a single thing without you in my life. Alex? Her voice was barely a whisper. I was blind, he continued, his grey eyes shimmering with emotion. I knew you were struggling, and I convinced myself that declarations and gifts would fix it. I let you face the wolves alone while I patted myself on the back for being supportive. He shook his head, disgust evident in his voice. I was a coward, and an idiot, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. Sophie was crying. She couldn't help it. The tears were streaming down her face, and she didn't even care that a dozen people were watching, recording, witnessing the complete destruction of her emotional walls. You said you don't belong in my world, Alex said softly. So I'm changing my world. I'm going to sue every outlet that harassed you. I'm going to cut ties with every person who disrespected you. I'm going to turn down every event, every gala, every obligation that makes you feel invisible. He reached for her hands, and she let him take them. You are my priority, Sophie. Not the company, not the image. You. You can't restructure your entire life because of me. I can, and I did. His smile was watery, vulnerable, beautiful. Check the news. It's already done. She laughed through her tears, a broken, disbelieving sound. You're insane. Completely. Irrevocably. About you. The silence stretched between them, electric with possibility. The entire bookstore seemed to hold its breath. "I love you," Alex said. "I love your wit and your strength, and the way you refuse to be impressed by anything I do. I love that you slapped me the first time we met. I love that you make me want to be better than I've ever been." "I love you too," Sophie whispered, and the words felt like coming home. "I love you, and I'm terrified, and I don't know how to do this." "Then we figure it out together." He squeezed her hands. "That's all I'm asking. A chance to prove that you're everything, that we're everything." She should have said something eloquent, something worthy of this moment, this man, this impossible love story. Instead, she pulled him to his feet and into her arms, and around them, Brennan's books erupted into applause. The applause faded, but Sophie barely noticed. She was wrapped in Alex's arms, her face pressed against his chest, listening to the rapid thunder of his heartbeat, and realizing that for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. "People are still filming," she mumbled into his sweater. "I know. This is going to be all over the internet. I know that too." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands cradling her face with devastating tenderness. "I don't care. Let them see. Let the whole world see that Alexander Hartwell is completely, embarrassingly, irrevocably in love with Sophie Bennett." She laughed, a real laugh, bright and surprised. "You're going to ruin your reputation. Best decision I ever made." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, wiping away the last traces of her tears. "Well, second best. The first was walking into that bar and kissing a stranger. That was a terrible decision. It led me to you. That makes it perfect." They left the bookstore hand in hand, ignoring the stares and the whispered questions and her co-worker's knowing smile. The afternoon sun was golden and warm, and Sophie felt like she was walking through a dream, the kind where everything is too beautiful to be real, but you never want to wake up. Alex's car was waiting outside, but he didn't move toward it. Instead, he stood on the sidewalk, still holding her hand, looking at her like she was something precious and rare. "Come home with me," he said quietly. "We have so much to talk about, so much to figure out, and I just—" He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "I don't want to let you out of my sight. Not yet." Sophie knew she should be practical. She had work tomorrow. She had her own apartment, her own life, 1,000 reasons to maintain some distance while they rebuilt what had broken. But she was tired of being practical, tired of protecting herself from the possibility of hurt, tired of holding back when every fiber of her being was screaming to leap. "Okay," she said simply. His smile could have lit up the entire city. The drive to his penthouse passed in comfortable silence, their fingers intertwined on the seat between them. Sophie watched the city flow past the tinted windows and marveled at how different everything felt, how the same streets she had walked in misery just hours ago now seemed full of possibility. Alex's penthouse was warm and welcoming, nothing like the cold showcase she had expected when she'd first visited. He had made it a home, filled with comfortable furniture and walls lined with books and small touches that spoke to the man beneath the billionaire. "Wine?" he offered. "Coffee? Food? I think I have... Actually, I have no idea what I have. I haven't been home much the past 3 days. Water is fine." She settled onto his couch, the same couch where they'd spent so many evenings, where she'd started falling for him without meaning to. "We should probably talk." "We should." He brought her a glass of water and sat beside her, close, but not touching. "I'll start. I should have listened when you tried to tell me how bad things had gotten. I was so focused on the deal, on work, that I convinced myself everything would be fine if I just kept pushing forward. I should have been more honest about what I was feeling," Sophie admitted. "Instead of trying to be strong, I should have told you I was drowning. You shouldn't have had to. I should have seen it." He reached for her hand. "From now on we talk, about everything, even the hard stuff, especially the hard stuff." They talked for hours, about her fears, the cameras, the comparisons, the constant feeling of inadequacy, about his failures, the cancelled dinners, the missed moments, the way he'd let his work consume everything else, about the future, what they wanted, what they needed, what they were willing to fight for. "I meant what I said in the store," Alex told her, as the sky outside darkened to purple. "I'm restructuring everything. The company can survive without me micromanaging every detail. I've hired the best people in the world. It's time I let them do their jobs." "And Victoria? The women from the gala?" His jaw tightened. "Already handled. I called Victoria this morning and made it very clear that our acquaintance is over. Anyone who disrespected you is no longer welcome in my life. Period. Sophie felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. You are my priority, Sophie. Not society connections. Not business relationships, you. She looked at him. This man who had upended his entire existence in 3 days, who had knelt in front of a bookstore full of strangers to prove his love, who was looking at her now like she held the keys to every future he could imagine. Kiss me, she whispered. His eyes darkened, and she watched his careful control waver. Sophie, I've been waiting months for you to really kiss me. She shifted closer, her heart pounding. No more waiting. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. His hand came up to cup her face, fingers sliding into her hair. His forehead touched hers, and for a moment they just breathed together, suspended in the electricity of anticipation. Then his lips met hers. The first touch was gentle, a question, a promise, a beginning. But Sophie had spent too long wanting this, and gentleness wasn't enough. She pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, and felt him groan against her mouth as his control finally, beautifully shattered. He kissed her like she was air, and he was drowning, like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. His hands were everywhere, in her hair on her waist, tracing the curve of her spine, and every touch left fire in its wake. I love you, he breathed against her lips. God, Sophie, I love you so much. Show me, she whispered back. He pulled away just enough to look at her, his grey eyes searching her face. Are you sure? I don't want to rush. I'm sure. She smiled, suddenly feeling braver than she ever had. I've never been more sure of anything. He stood and offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Later, Sophie would remember that night in fragments of sensation and emotion, the reverence in Alex's touch as he carefully removed her clothes, treating her body like something sacred. The way he whispered her name like a prayer against her skin. The overwhelming tenderness in his eyes as he held her, his hands gentle and devoted. He loved her slowly, thoroughly, with a patience that brought tears to her eyes. Every kiss was a promise. Every touch was an affirmation. When she finally fell apart in his arms, gasping his name, he held her through the aftershocks with whispered words of adoration. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. The city glittered beyond the windows, but Sophie couldn't imagine anywhere she would rather be. I'm never letting you go, Alex murmured against her hair. You know that, right? Sophie smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest, right above his heart. I'm counting on it. And as she drifted to sleep in the arms of the man she loved, Sophie knew with absolute certainty that everything she had endured, every cruel comment, every lonely night, every moment of doubt, had been worth it for this, for him, for them. The next few weeks proved that Alexander Hartwell was not a man who made empty promises. Sophie woke up the morning after their reconciliation to find Alex already on the phone, pacing his penthouse living room in sweatpants and a rumpled t-shirt, looking nothing like a billionaire, and everything like a man on a mission. I don't care what they claim about public interest, he was saying, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. They camped outside her apartment. They followed her to work. That's harassment, and I want every legal option on the table. He caught her watching from the bedroom doorway, and his expression softened immediately. He held up one finger, just a minute, and finished the call. That was my legal team, he explained, crossing to her and pressing a kiss to her forehead. We're filing lawsuits against 3 outlets for invasion of privacy. The letters go out today. Alex, you don't have to... Yes, I do. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture now achingly familiar. I told you I would protect you. This is me protecting you. The lawsuits made headlines, but not the kind Sophie had come to dread. Billionaire takes on tabloids for love, one outlet declared. Another ran with Hartwell threatens legal action against paparazzi harassment. The narrative was shifting. She was no longer the gold digger invading his world, but the woman he was willing to fight for. More importantly, the photographers disappeared. Within a week of the legal letters going out, the constant surveillance evaporated. No more cameras outside her apartment, no more strangers following her to work. No more invasive questions hurled across sidewalks. Word travels fast, Alex explained with grim satisfaction. No outlet wants to be the one I make an example of. Sophie could finally walk to Brennan's books without looking over her shoulder, and the relief was so profound it nearly brought her to tears. But Alex wasn't finished. She learned about the rest through Megan, who had developed an impressive network of society gossip sources during her years as a lawyer's wife. Did you know Victoria Sterling was publicly cut from the Hartwell Foundation gala guest list? Megan reported during one of their coffee dates. And apparently Alex called her personally to end their friendship. The exact words, according to my sources, were, "I never want to hear my girlfriend's name from your mouth again." Sophie nearly choked on her latte. He didn't. He absolutely did. And that's not all. Megan was practically glowing with second-hand satisfaction. 3 other women from that little circle have been quietly removed from every Hartwell-associated event. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but the rumors are spectacular. I didn't ask him to do any of that. You didn't have to. That's the point. Megan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. He's showing you, Sophie. Not just telling, showing. That's rare. It was rare. Sophie was learning that every day. Alex had completely restructured his schedule. He still worked. He was too driven to sit idle entirely. But the endless meetings and late-night calls had been replaced by a more sustainable rhythm. He was home for dinner more often than not. He texted her throughout the day, not with apologies for missing things, but with random observations and terrible jokes and links to articles he thought she might like. He was present in a way he hadn't been before, and Sophie felt herself unfurling like a flower finally getting enough sunlight. One evening, he surprised her by showing up at Brennan's books just before closing time. "I have a proposition," he announced, settling into his favorite chair, the worn leather armchair near the poetry section that he had claimed as his own. "Should I be concerned?" "Probably." His smile was mischievous. "I want to introduce you to some people." Sophie's guard immediately went up. "What kind of people?" "Investors. People who fund small businesses." He held up a hand before she could protest. "Not my money. I know you want to do this yourself, and I respect that more than I can say. But I have contacts who might be interested in your bookstore cafe concept, and I thought, you want to help me get funding for my dream. I want to open doors. You'll walk through them on your own merit." He looked almost nervous, which was absurd on a man who regularly negotiated billion-dollar deals. "Is that okay? If it's overstepping, just say so. I'm still figuring out the boundaries here." Sophie studied him, this man who had dismantled pieces of his empire for her, who was now offering to use his connections not to solve her problems, but to give her opportunities. It was such a careful distinction, and the fact that he understood it made her heart swell. "It's okay," she said softly. "More than okay." His relief was visible. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She crossed to where he sat and settled onto his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you for understanding what I need. I'm trying." He kissed her softly. "I'm going to keep trying for the rest of my life." The meeting with the investors happened the following week. Sophie presented her business plan, refined over years of dreaming and now polished to perfection, to a small group of people who actually seemed interested in what she had to say. Alex sat in the back of the room, silent and supportive, letting her shine on her own. By the end of the presentation, 2 investors had requested follow-up meetings. By the end of the month, Sophie had secured funding for her bookstore cafe. "I can't believe it's actually happening," she said that night, curled up on Alex's couch with a glass of champagne, still slightly dazed. "After all these years of dreaming, it's actually happening. I can believe it." Alex clinked his glass against hers. "You're remarkable, Sophie Bennett. The world is just finally catching up." She kissed him then, champagne sweet and bubbling with joy, and thought that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe it too. Later, as they lay in his bed watching the city lights twinkle beyond the windows, Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Megan, David and I are starting couples therapy. I thought you should know. Watching you and Alex fight for each other made me realize we should fight too." Sophie smiled, showing the message to Alex. "That's good," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "They've got something worth saving." "So do we," Sophie murmured. "We do." He pulled her closer. "And I'm never letting it go." The 4th month of their relationship brought transformation on every front. Sophie had found the perfect location for her bookstore cafe, a charming corner property in the West Village with exposed brick walls, tall windows that flooded the space with natural light, and enough room for both books and the cozy seating area she had always envisioned. The building needed work, but she could already see it. Shelves lined with stories, comfortable armchairs tucked into reading nooks, the warm scent of coffee mingling with the perfume of paper and ink. "It's perfect," she breathed, standing in the empty space with Alex beside her, both of them covered in a fine layer of construction dust from their inspection. "It's going to be perfect," he corrected gently. "Right now it's mostly cobwebs and questionable electrical work. But yes, I can see it. Your name on the window, customers who never want to leave, coffee that's actually good, unlike the swill I served you in the beginning. Your coffee wasn't that bad. Sophie, I gave you instant coffee, from a jar, in my penthouse." She laughed, remembering those early days when he would show up at Brennan's with expensive lattes, but somehow couldn't operate his own coffee maker. "You've improved significantly since then. I've had excellent motivation." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm proud of you, you know that, right? You might have mentioned it once or twice. I'll keep mentioning it. Forever, if necessary." They were leaving the property, discussing renovation timelines and contractor schedules, when Alex's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened instantly. "Who is it?" Sophie asked. "Victoria." He showed her the screen. "She's been trying to reach me for weeks. I've been ignoring her, but apparently she's persistent." Sophie felt the old anxiety stir in her chest, but it was distant now, a shadow of what it had been. She trusted Alex completely. Whatever Victoria wanted, it wouldn't change anything between them. "Answer it," she said. "End it properly." Alex raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I want to see." He answered the call, putting it on speaker so Sophie could hear. "Alexander." Finally. Victoria's voice was honey smooth and practiced. "I've been trying to reach you for ages. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Victoria. Surely we can talk about this. We've been friends for years. One little conversation at a gala shouldn't end that." Alex's jaw tightened. "It wasn't a little conversation. You and your friend systematically humiliated the woman I love when you thought no one was listening. That's not a misunderstanding. That's cruelty." A pause. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had lost some of its polish. "Alexander, I don't know what she told you, but I'm sure it was taken out of context. Women like her can be very manipulative." "Women like her?" Alex's voice went dangerously quiet. "You mean intelligent, kind, genuine women who don't need a trust fund to prove their worth? You're right, Victoria. Women like her are very rare. That's why I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows how precious she is." Sophie's breath caught. Even now, even knowing how he felt, hearing him defend her so fiercely made her heart soar. "You can't be serious about her." Victoria's composure was cracking now. "She's a bookstore clerk, Alexander. She doesn't belong in our world. In 6 months you'll be bored and looking for someone more suitable." "I'm going to stop you right there." Alex's tone was ice. "I'm not interested in your predictions or your opinions. Sophie is my future. The only question is whether I marry her this year or next, not whether I'll get bored. And frankly, Victoria, the fact that you can't understand that tells me everything I need to know about why we were never more than acquaintances." Silence on the other end of the line. "Don't contact me again," Alex continued. "Not to apologize, not to explain, not for any reason. We're done. Permanently." He ended the call without waiting for a response. Sophie stared at him, her mind stuck on one particular phrase. "Did you just say you're thinking about marrying me?" Alex blinked, seeming to realize what he'd revealed. A slow smile spread across his face, that boyish, slightly embarrassed smile that she loved so much. "I might have said something along those lines. This year or next? Depends on how annoying you find me by the end of month 4. He stepped closer, his hands finding her waist. "But yes, Sophie, I'm thinking about it. I've been thinking about it since approximately the 3rd day after we met." "That's insane. We barely knew each other then." "I knew enough." His forehead touched hers, his voice softening. "I knew you were different. I knew you saw through all my nonsense to something real. I knew that if I was lucky enough to earn your love, I would never want anyone else." Sophie's eyes were burning with tears. Happy tears, the kind she was still getting used to. "You're ridiculous." Ridiculously in love with you. That was terrible. You're smiling. She was. She couldn't help it. This man, this impossible, frustrating, wonderful man, had turned her entire world upside down and rebuilt it into something more beautiful than she had ever imagined. That night, back at the penthouse that was increasingly feeling like home, Alex pulled out his phone and blocked Victoria's number with theatrical flourish. "There," he announced, showing Sophie the screen. "Officially removed from our lives." Was that really necessary, the dramatic demonstration? Absolutely necessary. I want no ambiguity about where I stand. He tossed the phone aside and pulled her onto his lap. "You are my person, Sophie Bennett. Everyone else is just background noise." She kissed him then, long and deep and full of promise. Later, lying tangled together in sheets that probably cost more than her old monthly rent, Sophie thought about how far they had come. From a slap in a bar to this impossible, perfect love that had weathered storms and emerged stronger for it. "I love you," she murmured against his chest. "I love you too." His arms tightened around her. More every single day. And for the first time in her life, Sophie believed completely that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 6 months after a slap that changed everything, Sophie stood in the middle of her bookstore cafe and tried very hard not to cry. Bennett and Books read the elegant sign in the window, a name Alex had suggested during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions, insisting that her name deserved to be part of her dream. The space had been transformed beyond recognition. Warm wooden shelves lined with carefully curated books, cozy reading nooks with plush armchairs, and a gleaming coffee bar that filled the air with the rich aroma of fresh espresso. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Everything was absolutely terrifying. "You're making that face again," Alex observed from behind the coffee bar, where he had been practicing his barista skills with varying degrees of success. "The face that says you're about to spiral into self-doubt." "I am not making a face." "You're definitely making a face. It's the same face you made when you thought the investors would hate your presentation, and when you thought the contractors would never finish on time, and when you— Okay, I get it. I make anxious faces." Sophie ran her hands through her hair, surveying the shop for the 100th time. "What if no one comes? What if they hate the coffee? What if the whole thing is a disaster and I've wasted everyone's money?" Alex abandoned his espresso experiments and crossed to where she stood. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and grounding. "Sophie, look at me." She looked. "This place is incredible. You are incredible. And in approximately 2 hours, this shop is going to be filled with people who love books and coffee and supporting independent businesses." He kissed her forehead. "Also, I've been practicing my latte art. I can almost make a heart that doesn't look like a deformed potato." Despite herself, Sophie laughed. "Your latte art is terrible. It's improving. Last week it looked like an amoeba. Today it's definitely potato adjacent." He grinned. "Progress." The hours before opening passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Megan arrived early with David in tow, the couple looking happier than they had in months, their therapy clearly making a difference. Sophie's co-workers from Brennan's Books came with flowers and congratulations. Even Maria, the elderly Italian woman who had fed a young and broke Alex years ago, appeared with a basket of pastries and a torrent of emotional Italian that made Alex blush. "She says she always knew you would find a good woman," he translated, looking slightly mortified, "and that she expects to meet our children someday." "Maria!" Sophie exclaimed, her cheeks heating. "We're not even— we haven't—" Maria waved away her protests and kissed both her cheeks, muttering something that sounded suspiciously like "beautiful babies." At precisely 10 o'clock, Sophie unlocked the doors of Bennett and Books. The first customer was a young woman who spent 20 minutes browsing the poetry section before buying 3 collections and a lavender latte. The second was an elderly gentleman who declared the reading chairs the most comfortable in the city and settled in with a biography for the next 2 hours. By noon, the shop was humming with activity, customers browsing, coffee orders flowing, the soft murmur of conversation mixing with carefully curated background music. Sophie moved through it all in a daze, unable to quite believe this was real. Her dream, her shop, her life. She caught Alex's eye across the room, and he raised his coffee cup in a silent toast, his smile saying everything words couldn't. By closing time, Sophie was exhausted in the best possible way. The last customer had left, the doors were locked, and she stood alone among the shelves and the lingering scent of coffee, trying to process everything that had happened. "Not bad for day one," Alex said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "Sold out of 3 book titles and nearly ran out of croissants. I'd call that a success." Sophie took the glass he offered, clinking it against his. "We did it. You did it. I just made terrible lattes and tried not to break anything. Your lattes were slightly less terrible by the end." High praise from the proprietor. He set down his glass and took hers, placing it carefully on the nearest shelf. Something in his expression had shifted, nervousness flickering beneath the confidence, a vulnerability she had learned to recognize. "Alex, what are you—" "I had a whole speech planned," he said, and his voice was slightly rough. "I practiced it for weeks. It was eloquent and romantic and probably would have made you cry." Sophie's heart was suddenly pounding. "What kind of speech? The kind that starts with 6 months ago you slapped me in a bar and ends with, please spend the rest of your life with me." The world seemed to stop spinning. Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophie's hands flew to her mouth. "But I realized something today, watching you in this place you built from nothing but dreams and determination." He opened the box to reveal a ring, elegant and understated, a single diamond that caught the light like captured starfire. "Eloquence doesn't matter. What matters is that I love you. What matters is that you made me believe in something I never thought I'd find." "Alex," she breathed. He smiled that smile, the crooked, boyish one that had been her undoing since the very beginning. "You gave me the best slap of my life. Now I want you to give me all your days, every morning, every evening. Every argument about whose turn it is to make coffee." "That's a terrible proposal line." "I know. Is it working anyway?" Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was laughing too, that bright, surprised laugh that only he could draw from her. "Sophie Bennett." He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. "Will you marry me and continue to find me annoying for the rest of our lives?" She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the shop around them, this impossible dream that had somehow become reality. "Yes," she said, "obviously yes, you ridiculous man." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of joy. She could taste champagne and promises on his lips, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were crying, the happy, overwhelmed tears of people who had found something precious and were never letting go. "I love you," Alex murmured against her mouth. "I love you too." Sophie pulled back to look at her ring, still barely believing it was real. "But I should warn you, I'm going to be an insufferable bride. I would expect nothing less. And we're definitely not doing a society wedding. No galas, no socialites. Maria's restaurant, 50 guests maximum, all the pasta you can eat." Sophie grinned. "Now you're speaking my language." They stayed in the bookstore until well past midnight, curled up in one of the reading nooks, making plans and laughing and stealing kisses, between discussions of wedding dates and honeymoon destinations. And when they finally went home, to the penthouse that had become theirs, Sophie fell asleep with her hand on Alex's chest and her ring catching moonlight, knowing that sometimes the best love stories start with a slap and end with forever. The wedding was everything Sophie had dreamed and nothing like she had expected. They held it at Maria's restaurant on a golden September afternoon, exactly as they had planned that first night in the bookstore. 50 guests filled the intimate space, close friends, family who had flown in from across the country, and a handful of genuinely kind people from Alex's world who had proven themselves worthy of the invitation. Sophie wore a simple ivory dress that flowed around her like water, her hair loose and threaded with wildflowers that Megan had insisted on weaving through the curls. Alex wore a grey suit that matched his eyes and looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "You're stunning," he murmured as she walked toward him, her arm linked through her father's. "You clean up okay yourself?" she whispered back. The ceremony was short and sweet, punctuated by Maria's joyful tears, and Alex's voice catching when he said, "I do." When they kissed as husband and wife, the entire restaurant erupted in applause, and Sophie tasted happiness on Alex's lips like honey and champagne. The reception that followed was warm and chaotic and perfect. Maria had outdone herself with the food, course after course of pasta and bread, and decadent desserts that left everyone groaning with satisfaction. Speeches were made, Megan's heartfelt and tearful, David's unexpectedly funny, and Alex's best man, a college friend Sophie had grown to adore. telling embarrassing stories that made Alex hide his face in his hands. When the dancing started, Alex pulled Sophie close and held her like she was made of something precious. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, testing the words. "That's going to take some getting used to. We have time." He spun her gently, his hand warm on her back. All the time in the world. They honeymooned in Italy. 2 weeks of exploring small villages and eating too much gelato and making love in a villa overlooking the Tuscan hills. Alex was hopeless at Italian, but somehow charmed every shopkeeper they met. Sophie filled a journal with memories and pressed flowers and the absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. When they returned to New York, real life resumed, but it was a different kind of real life now. Sophie ran her bookstore cafe with growing confidence, watching her dream flourish and expand. Alex had found a new rhythm with his company, one that included actual lunch breaks and weekends off, and being home in time for dinner more often than not. They argued sometimes because they were both stubborn and opinionated and terrible at admitting when they were wrong, but they always made up, usually with laughter and occasionally with Alex dramatically announcing that he was going to die from her stubbornness, before pulling her into a kiss that made her forget what they had been fighting about. It was, Sophie thought, the kind of love she had always read about in books, messy and real and absolutely worth it. 1 year after the slap that started everything, Sophie sat on the edge of their bathtub and stared at a piece of plastic that was about to change their lives. 2 lines. She checked the instructions again, checked the test again, checked herself in the mirror, half expecting to see someone different looking back. 2 lines. Positive. Pregnant. She was still sitting there, frozen in stunned disbelief, when Alex's voice echoed from the bedroom. "Sophie, you okay? You've been in there for 20 minutes. Did you fall in?" Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Can you come here?" The bathroom door opened immediately, Alex's expression shifting from playful concern to genuine worry when he saw her face. "What's wrong? Are you sick? Do we need to—" His gaze dropped to the test in her hands. He went completely still. "Is that—" Sophie nodded, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "I'm pregnant." For a long moment, Alex didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then his face broke into the most radiant smile she had ever seen. "You're pregnant," he repeated, his voice cracking on the word. "We're having a baby. We're having a baby." Alex let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He crossed the bathroom in 2 strides, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "A baby," he kept saying, pressing kisses all over her face, her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, her lips. "Our baby. Sophie. My Sophie." "You're not upset?" she asked, laughing through her tears. "I know we said we'd wait a little longer." "Upset?" He pulled back to stare at her incredulously. "I'm the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. You're giving me everything. A bookstore, a home, a family." He kissed her again, deep and fierce and overflowing with joy. "How could I possibly be upset?" He picked her up then, lifting her completely off the ground and spinning her around the bathroom like they were in a movie. Sophie shrieked and clutched his shoulders, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. "Put me down, you lunatic. I'm delicate now." "You've never been delicate a day in your life." But he set her down gently, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach, with unmistakable reverence. "Hello in there. I'm your father. I'm going to be terrible at this, but I promise to love you more than anything in the world, except your mother. Your mother comes first." "Alex," Sophie managed through her tears. "I mean it." He looked up at her, his grey eyes shimmering. "You changed everything for me, Sophie. You made me believe I could have this, a real life, a real family, something that matters more than money or success. And now you're giving me a child." His voice broke completely. "I don't have words for how much I love you." She pulled him close, holding him as they both cried. Happy tears, overwhelmed tears, the tears of 2 people who had fought for this love and won. Later that night, curled up in their bed with Alex's hand resting protectively on her stomach, Sophie thought about the journey that had brought them here. A bachelorette party and a stolen kiss, a slap that echoed through a bar, coffee and texts and a billionaire who wouldn't give up. "What are you thinking?" Alex murmured against her hair. "That slapping you was the best mistake I ever made." He laughed softly. "Want to know a secret?" "Always." "That night at the bar, before I kissed you, I actually wasn't looking for anyone. My friend's bet was an excuse. The truth is, I saw you laughing with your friends and something in my chest just stopped, like my heart recognized you before my brain caught up. Sophie turned in his arms to face him. That's incredibly cheesy. It's incredibly true. He kissed her softly. You were always my person, Sophie. I just had to be stupid enough to kiss you without asking so you could slap some sense into me. You're ridiculous. You married me anyway. My worst decision. Your best decision. He pulled her closer, his hand still resting on her stomach. Thank you. For what? For saying yes. For fighting for us. For this life we're building together. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. For everything. Sophie closed her eyes, surrounded by love and warmth and the promise of the future growing inside her. She thought about the bookstore that bore her name, the friends who had become family, the man who had rebuilt his world just to make room for her. She thought about the best slap she had ever given, and she smiled. Thank you too, she whispered, for not giving up, for proving that love stories don't just exist in books. Ours is better than any book, Alex said confidently. It really is. And as they drifted to sleep together, dreaming of nurseries and tiny hands and a love that had started with chaos and grown into something extraordinary, Sophie knew with absolute certainty that every challenge, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it. Because sometimes the best love stories don't begin with once upon a time, sometimes they begin with a slap, and they always end with forever. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.